The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, has been a very loud and very public voice in laying out the legality of Israel's assault on Gaza. She has documented and reported on countless violations of international law in Gaza by Israel and has criticized Western governments and institutions for failing to live up to their obligations to enforce the law. And that's made her a thorn in the side of many of Israel's defenders. And now the effort to silence her is picking up speed. On Wednesday evening, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio made this announcement. Today, I am imposing sanctions on UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese for her illegitimate and shameful efforts to prompt the International Criminal Court action against US and Israeli officials, companies, and executives. Albanese's campaign of political and economic warfare against the United States and Israel will no longer be tolerated. We will always stand by our partners in their right to self-defense. The United States will continue to take whatever action we deem necessary to respond to lawfare and protect our sovereignty and that of our allies. Apparently, just pointing out that something's breaking international law is now lawfare. That's very convenient. I mean, political and economic warfare against the United States is pretty hilarious when you consider that this is just one woman who has doesn't just have like this personal grudge against the US, but actually has like the weight of international legal institutions behind her. But when Marco Rubio is talking about political and economic warfare against the United States, what could he possibly be referring to? Probably this. Last week, Albanese published a report called From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide. In it, she examines the international corporations and institutions that are profiting from Israel's genocide in Gaza. Many US businesses are listed amongst those profiting from the murder of tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. These include Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, Google, Caterpillar, and Palantir. They also include British, Spanish, Danish, Korean, and Japanese businesses. But what seems to have upset Rubio the most is Albanese's suggestion that American executives may find themselves in the dock over their participation in genocide. In her report, Albanese writes this: where corporate entities continue their activities and relationships with Israel, with its economy, military, public and private sectors connected to the occupied Palestinian territory, they may be found to have knowingly contributed to violation of the Palestinian right to self-determination, annexation of Palestinian territory, maintenance of an unlawful occupation, and therefore the crime of aggression and associated human rights violations, crimes of apartheid and genocide, and other ancillary crimes and violations. Both criminal and civil laws in various jurisdictions can be invoked to hold corporate entities or their executives accountable for violations of human rights and/or crimes against international law. Albanese also calls on the international community to ensure that corporate entities face legal consequences for their involvement in violations of international law, including via the International Criminal Court. And it's that seems to have tipped Rubio and US President Donald Trump over the edge. In the sanctions order, Rubio says this: Albanese has recently escalated this effort by writing threatening letters to dozens of entities worldwide, including major American companies across finance, technology, defense, energy, and hospitality, making extreme and unfounded accusations and recommending the ICC pursue investigations and prosecutions of these companies and their executives. We will not tolerate these campaigns of political and economic warfare, which threaten our national interests and sovereignty. The United States will continue to take whatever actions we deem necessary to respond to lawfare, to check and prevent illegitimate ICC overreach and abuse of power, and to protect our sovereignty and that of our allies. Neither the US nor Israel are party to the ICC, and the sanction of Albanese is made possible by one of Donald Trump's many, many executive orders issued in February this year. Executive Order 14203 was issued in response to ICC arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Secretary Yoav Gallant. It authorizes the US government to sanction anyone who calls for the ICC to investigate American citizens. The sanctions against Albanese will likely mean a freeze on any assets she has in the US, as well as a ban on her or her family members traveling to the country. After Rubio published the sanction, Albanese posted this: Just to be sure, on this day more than ever, I stand firmly and convincingly on the side of justice as I have always done. I come from a country with a tradition of illustrious legal scholars, talented lawyers, and courageous judges who have defended justice at great cost and often with their own life. I intend to honour that tradition. Also, it's called the Rome Statute for a reason, and I am proud of it. It's not just the Trump administration that's been upset by Albanese's report into genocide profiteers. The Washington Post, itself owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, has reported that Google co-founder Sergey Brin called the UN transparently anti-Semitic after Albanese reported on their involvement in Israel's assault on Gaza. Writing on an internal Google forum, Brin said this to staff. With all due respect, throwing around the term genocide in relation to Gaza is deeply offensive to many Jewish people who have suffered actual genocides. I would also be careful citing transparently anti-Semitic organizations like the UN in relation to these issues. Google also appears to be selling ad space to the Israeli government, which is being used to discredit Albanese. A search for her name brings up this Israeli government-sponsored ad right at the top of the results page, linking to an Israeli government page listing accusations against Albanese over issues like anti-Semitism, political violence, and refusing to agree with Israel over what groups are or aren't terrorists. Albanese is not wrong to point out the money being made from genocide, and a new report from the left-wing Israeli magazine Plus 972 makes clear that Chinese companies are in on it too. 972 reports that the Israeli military is weaponizing Chinese-made delivery drones to drop grenades on Palestinian civilians in an effort to police expulsion orders. According to 972, Israeli soldiers are mostly using Evo drones produced by a Chinese company, Autel. They're primarily intended for photography and cost around £2,500 on Amazon, but they're being upgraded with a military-issued attachment known internally as an iron ball. That allows a hand grenade to be fixed to the drone and then dropped with the push of a button to detonate on the ground. And according to 972, the Israeli military is using them to deliberately kill civilians and civilian Palestinians returning to their homes after evacuations as a warning to others not to do the same. Last week, footage was posted online by Palestinian journalist Yunus Tirawi, appearing to show one of these drones in action. The drone footage is said to have been taken at the Netzarim corridor and Israeli construction now dividing the Gaza Strip in two. The operator takes aim at fleeing Palestinians and a grenade is dropped from the device, with the words "iron ball drop" appearing in Hebrew on the screen. One person is visibly struck before collapsing. One soldier, named only as S, was involved in such drone strikes in Rafah earlier this year. He told 972 that in reports, all Palestinians killed by the strikes were listed as terrorists, even though they only encountered one body bearing a knife. S told N72 this. It was clear that they were trying to return to their homes. There's no question. None of them were armed and nothing was ever found near their bodies. We never fired warning shots, not at any point. Now, the story gets even grimmer because the Palestinians were killed far from where the soldiers were positioned. S says their corpses weren't even collected. Rather, they were handled with shocking disrespect. You could see it on the drone footage. I couldn't bring myself to watch a dog eating a body, but others around me watched it. The dogs have learned to run toward areas where there's shooting or explosions. They understand it probably means there's a body there. Another soldier who served at Nusayrat refugee camp to 972 said this. There were many incidents of dropping grenades from drones. Were they aimed at armed militants? Definitely not. Once a commander defined an imaginary red line that no one is allowed to cross, anyone who does is marked for death. There was a boy who entered the off-limits zone. He didn't do anything. Other soldiers claimed to have seen him standing and talking to people. That's it. They dropped a grenade from the drone. In most cases, there was nothing you could tell yourself. There was no way to complete the sentence, "We killed them because." Stephen, uh, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to know what to say to that, but what do you say to that?
Well, to those descriptions of the ever more inventive ways that Israel's military finds to kill, humiliate, and disrespect Palestinians, I can only say I've had enough of them and would happily never hear anything like that again. To the sanctions against Francesca Albanese, I mean, I think I have a bit more to say on that, which is that, well, to start with, for once, it looks like the US is following the UK because, of course, we have led the way in terms of lawfare against groups who are supportive of Palestine through things like prescription. And now Donald Trump has followed up via Marco Rubio with sanctions on one of the most singular voices in the world, speaking facts, conveying, communicating amazingly well the condition of Palestine and the depravity of the Israeli military in Gaza. Um, so, it's very interesting that the sanction that Trump has imposed on Albanese comes from an executive order that he signed in February. And that executive order, if you look at it, is pretty extraordinary because it's not just about America. It's not just about saying the ICC can't pursue American citizens or anyone who tries to get the ICC involved is going to be sanctioned. It also says Israel and Israeli citizens. It's beyond belief, really, that the President of the United States has signed an executive order in which he takes on the power or gives the power to the state to pursue members of the international community who might, for instance, want to charge Israel with crimes in the ICC. And of course, as you said, this follows on from arrest warrants being issued to Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. But I don't think that that's what Trump's voters wanted him to be doing. I don't think they wanted him to be creating executive orders and possibly also a sanctions regime, which sanctions people. Not only, I mean, America is not a signatory to the International Court, neither is Israel. So I can see, fine, you as an American are not, as America are not part of this court, and so therefore you don't recognize it, and you don't want the UN ruling that it has jurisdiction over you anyway because one of your citizens has done something in a country that is a party to the court. I can see then, fine, you want to do whatever you can to protect your citizens, but I don't see why there should be executive orders in the US protecting Israel citizens. If they do something which many of them are doing in breach of international law. And it's very interesting to me that really what kicks this off is actually corporations, businesses, when executives are suddenly, when the idea of profit is suddenly brought into question as potentially even criminal. My God, you made money from a genocide. Isn't that what capitalists do? No. International law, as Albanese very carefully points out in that report, has mechanisms for marking the complicity of profiteers in war crimes. And that's exactly what she does in that report. And she, of course, then calls for the tools of justice to operate in order to punish those who've made money out of killing so far nearly 60,000 people. Now, look, the ICC was never, ever going to issue arrest warrants for those executives. It took it long enough to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu and for Yoav Gallant. And also, no country who are signatories to the Rome Convention were going to enforce it. Benjamin Netanyahu is in the US at the moment. He may have left now. He was there last night. And he just happily sailed through the airspace of plenty of signatories to the convention, plenty of members of the International Criminal Court. Not a single one of them did anything to prevent them moving through their territory. Sometimes it's disputed to what degree airspace is territory, but there was not a sound made about this wanted person wanted by the criminal court moving through that airspace. So despite Albanese's report, there was no real risk to any of these executives. So what is the point of the sanction then? Well, the point of the sanction, just like in some cases a point of prescription, is to create a cloud around the person that the sanction is applied to make it difficult for other people with whom Albanese engages to want to engage with her in case that cloud passes on to her as well, to make it hard for broadcasters to broadcast her because now she has been officially sanctioned by the US. So therefore, to quieten her message. And indeed, to make it difficult for the UN to continue to have her in her post as special rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories. That's the point of this kind of lawfare, both in the UK and in the US. It isn't really necessarily about the criminal law. It's not necessarily about prosecution in the case of prescription or actually, ruining Francesca Albanese financially or stopping her from coming to America. That's not what it's about. What it's about is creating a kind of silence around, in this case, the world's most eloquent non-Palestinian speaker for Palestinian rights, to create a silence around her that will just grow and grow and grow until she just isn't heard anymore. That's the point of this kind of lawfare.
Yeah, I mean, it's a textbook definition of lawfare because it's purely there to delegitimize her. And I mean, one of the reasons why there is such opposition to the ICC case was because once you set in motion genocide proceedings like this, suddenly this question of legal complicity becomes a real problem for a lot of companies and governments, because suddenly it becomes like, the bread and butter of your company or the immovable parts of your foreign policy suddenly become marked by this potential complicity within genocide, which that in itself doesn't necessarily trouble a lot of these people. But the idea that that might one day reach a court maybe does, even though for many of the reasons that you've outlined, it's unlikely that that will happen, at least in the near future.